Hello out there, and welcome back to another episode of My Grocery Adventure. My name is Carly Whorton, and I am normally the host of this podcast. Today, we are joined by a guest host, Mr. Will Katz. Will, thank you for being here.
It is my
Appreciate
pleasure.
you. Yeah. Will is doing the kind service of helping to facilitate my telling of my story. As normally I help other people's to tell their stories. So where we left off last time, as far as this is the second part of my story, was the end of high school, getting elected to Kansas FFA State Office, and that being something of a fate sealing moment as far as a state officer, you're going to go to some type of post high school educational institution, whether that's a community college or 4-year college, didn't matter, but you got to go somewhere. And the only place that I had applied just so I could apply to state office was K-State. So when I got elected, it was at that moment that I knew, okay, so I'm going to go to K-State here in 2 months and start college. And that's where we left off. I'm a state officer and ready to head out into the world.
So, yeah, that's just so interesting to me because as I hear you tell the tale, it's like you weren't that committed at all to the notion of college, certainly not right out of high school, and maybe not even ever, from what I can tell. But this sort of strange moment, and as I recall, this comes from your kind of love of speaking in front of people,
Yeah.
like almost the weirdest thing in history, because almost every other person I know is like, I hate speaking in front of people. But you tell us this story about how you discovered that you love doing that, and then that is sort of what leads you to college
Yeah.
after all of these things. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of amazing. But I'm curious, like, how did you then decide how to spend your time at college? How did you decide what you were going to major in? What did you major in?
So I majored in agricultural economics. And that was also part of the tail end of last time's episode was
That's right.
how I chose was I happened to meet a person who I thought was so impressive, and her major was ag econ, and I was like, okay, great, I'll major in ag econ. So again, a very like easy decision, and I think easy because of what you just said of like I wasn't really that committed to it. I was like, this is something to do. I'm for sure gonna go for the year I'm a state officer, but me as a person, I don't like to start something big like that if I'm not going to finish it, get my money's worth kind of thing, like get something out of it. And so, how did I decide how to be at college? I was like, get this shit over with as fast as possible. So, I took gigantic course loads. I took summer session classes. I had, this is like another paradox within my world, but I had quite a few college credits during high school that I had taken, even though that wasn't really where I wanted to go. I just personally like to learn. So there was a Highland Community College Extension Center right there in Whorton. The classes were really cheap. A lot of them were taught like right there at the high school. A lot of them, like my junior year, I think it was, I did a 0 hour where you show up to school at like 6:30. And so your school day is just a little bit longer. Well, you could be done an hour and a half sooner, or you could just have more. And that was obviously what I was doing. So I did things like that mostly because I wanted to take the classes, not because I was like gearing up for something big. But so between the college credits that I had during high school, and then as fast and as big as my course loads were, I finished college in 3 years. And so at 20, graduated with my ag econ bachelor's degree.
Wow. That's amazing. I think I graduated when I was 27, if I'm not
That's
mistaken.
way more common.
So,
I mean, like
yeah.
Jeannie took a bunch of years. Like, there's way more stories
Mhm.
I feel like that are way closer to that of like, and it was just so it's again such a paradox because I just really didn't want to be there. Like, I wasn't interested in like partying or going to football games or like I didn't join a sorority or like anything. Like I didn't do anything extracurricular. I took my classes, I did my work, and I got the hell out of there. But at
So
the end,
you were there to learn stuff and get a degree then, which is maybe
basically,
what it's really all about.
I
I,
well,
I
I
just
don't
I think
know.
that
I don't know if that's true.
yeah, true. For some people, it's not. I just think that that notion is really fascinating. Where, like, because you're not super committed to it, because it's not very high stakes for you, like that allows you to excel. You're not putting, pressure on yourself. It's not every exam isn't I must pass this or my family will disown me. It's probably actually really conducive to learning stuff.
Well, and I think too, like the term is like first generation college student or something like that, like where your family hasn't gone to college
Yes,
before. And so
right.
they don't know.
Yes.
They don't, I mean, they just, oh, you're doing that. Okay, cool. And my disillusionment coming out of high school with my like 3.91 GPA I worked so freaking hard for. Dude, I'm pretty sure I had a 3.0 GPA in my bachelor's because I just I studied enough. I
Mhm.
calculated like what score do you need on the final to keep a B in the class? And then I'd let myself get like a D on the final or something. Like yeah, I just like didn't care. So my 3.0 GPA in college was so much easier. Like the amount of effort that it takes to go from a B to an A is a lot. And the amount of effort that it took to get a B was like it made it a lot easier considering I was taking such huge course loads. I wasn't trying to get A's at all. I didn't care about that.
But I happen to know that you also went to grad school because I got at least a little future sketch here.
Yeah.
What possessed you to do that? I mean,
Yeah.
because again, your undergraduate career doesn't sound like it was sort of the kind that we would earmark for future grad students of America.
Right. Like it was again, it's just my story's kind of full of paradoxes. It's like a Plinko, like on The Price is Right,
Mm,
I think is where they play Plinko.
yeah,
And like the thing kind of
yeah,
falls like this. Like that's like my trajectory. It feels like I don't get to
yeah.
know what's coming while I'm doing the thing. I just do the thing. So and this is the reason I say, I don't know if rushing through your undergrad is the best idea there is, because when I'm 20 years old and walking at graduation, I was like, I'm a child. Like, I'm not ready to go out in the world. Like, I don't know what I want to do. I still have no clue. When I was getting to the end of my undergrad and like looking at options and what am I going to do next, um, it's like I did apply for jobs. This is also the spring of 2009. So the economy had
Okay.
just hit the toilet like less than a year
Terrible.
ago.
Yeah.
And the job market is not exactly bustling at this point. And I did get a few offers, but I'm pretty sure at least two of them were for grain merchandising positions, which is basically like a
Oh.
stock market broker for corn kind of thing. Like you're buying corn and
Mm-hmm.
selling corn, like wheat, oats, like whatever the commodity is. And I just like could not picture myself doing that, let alone they wanted to start you at like 35K and you got to move to the middle of nowhere, Iowa. And I'm like, this is not where my life is headed. I can tell you that right now. So the other
Wow.
option was unfolding kind of alongside this job hunt was my advisor in undergrad. Actually, I just did an episode. This one wouldn't have aired when this one is, but it'll be coming up. So there's an episode coming up where she talks about there was no college advisor. And because of that, she took classes for like 6.5 years before she realized like she's not headed towards anything. And it's like, if there
Yep.
had been an advisor, maybe I would have, been a little bit more on the ball with like, what am I actually doing here? She was just taking what was interesting. And at K State, they did an awesome job. I mean, we had an advisor that you met with like every semester the whole time. So I felt very supported in that way. And going into my senior year, he was the one that was like, have you thought about grad school? Is that something that you would be interested in exploring? And so just like, Larison in high school is like putting this idea in my head of like, you should run for state office. Like, here's my advisor in college being like, have you thought about grad school? And I'm like, oh, well, not really, but what's that like? Like, what does that entail? And what he told me was that if you apply, like we're far enough out right now where you can apply and actually get a position. So it's like a paid position to go to grad school. And I'm like, what? Like you get paid to be a student? Yeah, you do. And like maybe you're working as a research assistant or maybe you're working as like a teaching assistant, but you're in grad school and you're making money being a grad student. And then maybe that money basically covers your tuition. So you're kind of breaking even on the deal. It's kind of hard to live on that if you're not also taking loans for tuition or something is helping you pay for that. But so that was like, I didn't even know that was a thing that existed.
Mm,
And so that was really
yeah.
eye-opening. And I was like, all right, so like, how would that work? And he started talking to me about, you basically get matched up with a major professor, like who's going to oversee your graduate work, your project, whatever it is that you're going to do for your thesis. And he introduced me then to Dr. Vincent Aminar Boadu. That's my
Oh,
best.
you know what?
You know
I
him.
actually know him.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, you know what? It's so funny watching all of your various podcasts come through because either I know like half of the people, or at least I know of them
Yeah.
fairly well. And
Yeah.
so Dr. Vincent, I wouldn't say I know him very well, but I met him probably in the early 2000s. He
Oh,
was kind of hosting kind of this really early developmental model of something that's like 1 million cups is. And he was bringing people to Manhattan and putting them in meetings like, are you an investor? Are you an entrepreneur? Like you'd wear different color name tags based on that. I can't remember what it was called, but it was
mhm.
very far ahead of his time. And
Yeah.
I was very impressed by it. So yeah.
Dude, I'm
So
so
hopefully
glad
you're going to
you
go
know
on and
him.
say really nice things about Dr. Vincent because
He changed my life. Like
great.
the how I would summarize him and the role he played in my life is like he taught me how to think. He
Really?
taught me how to think. And I had
Well,
not learned
that's high
that yet.
praise.
I had not learned that yet in my life at all.
Yeah.
Like, and
Well, I don't want to let you go on because I really want to recognize before you do this notion of being a first generation college student. I don't think you and I have talked about that much. I don't think we talked about it much on the last episode, but my opinion is that like there's literally nothing that changes personal and family trajectories nearly as much as being that first generation college student. Like it takes so much. Like you kind of have to get outside of a paradigm within your family. Like the only thing that you've known, the only thing that you've seen. To do that is just extraordinary. And I know quite a few people that are in that first generation college graduate category, and
mhm.
like every one of them is pretty extraordinary. So
Yeah.
I got to give you some credit there. And then I could be completely wrong, but I feel like a fairly high percentage of those folks say, well, now that I'm here, I might as well do grad school too.
I it was
And
the
that kind of sounds like what you did. It
yeah,
was just, okay, since I'm here, I
yeah.
might as well.
I mean, so I met Dr. Vincent and he had a project going on with USDA that was like already underway. He had already gotten the grant. They had 3 grad students who started on the project the year before I did, and the funding was for 4, but they couldn't find a 4th. And so then here I come along the next year, and he's still got this money to pay for his fellow to go through grad school and do the project. And basically, instead of having like a blank slate for my thesis, I would have um, like the beginnings of what they were working on. And so my thesis was kind of falling under an umbrella that was already underway. And so yeah, that was it was a life-changing experience to stay there. And really it came down to, okay, well, you can go move to the middle of nowhere, Iowa, and buy and sell corn for 35,000 a year, or you can stay at grad school for like, I think the fellowship was even more than the College of Ag paid their grad students. It was like 21,000 a year to stay and do grad school. And so I'm like, I'll keep living like a college student. I'll maybe
Yeah.
branch out a little more socially during grad school than I did during undergrad because I feel still like I'm just not ready to step into the world like on my own. Which, as we'll see, I had a really big definition of what that meant to do that. But yeah, so grad school came right on the
So
heels
then
of undergrad. What's that?
did you then step out a little bit more into the social world in grad school?
Oh my gosh. I say that I made my first friends in grad school. Like my
Okay.
first real friends where it wasn't based on like seventh grade, we're gossiping about the same kids, like these were friends where like we had shared interests. Like we loved math and statistics and talking about the microeconomy and talking about how that translated into the global sense and like, how old is the economy and how does that cause it to grow and evolve over time, like newer economies versus really established economies. So like these were people that
Ooh.
like I could freaking talk to and about the things
Mm-hmm.
that I've been, thinking about in my mind and never found a group of people where we're sitting around for hours at a time having these conversations. And so I felt like I kind of found my people a little bit in grad school. And I did, especially the second year. I was kind of like the resident gatherer. I would like go around to all the cubicles and be like, we're going for frozen yogurt at 4. Who's coming? And then there's like 20 people at the frozen yogurt place. And I'm just sitting around like, you guys are all here because I invited you. I built this and like look at they're all laughing and they're talking and this is like the coolest thing I've ever done. It was awesome.
You talking about that place on campus, or are you talking about a different place? No, that
No,
was just ice cream, wasn't
it was a froyo. What was it called? Like orange something?
it? Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
orange.
that's like 12 years ago at this point, but
I know what
yeah,
you're talking
it,
about.
it was
Yeah.
like over by what's that? My geography of Manhattan is terrible.
Well, it's better than mine, I promise you.
Near to the mall, I think ish.
Okay.
Like over on that side of
Okay.
Manhattan is where this place was. But yeah, anyways, so especially the second year, um, yeah, I was way into the social side and the people that I was hanging out with were my grad school people. And most of our hanging out was sitting around with beers or wine and talking about economics. So nerding out together socially. And it was awesome.
Orange leaf.
Yes. Yes. That is
Yes.
it. Yeah.
I
We
had
were,
to I had
we
to
went there a
Google it
lot.
over here. So
Thank
yes.
you. That was,
And so friends not just by proximity but by interest. That's actually
yeah.
kind of a fascinating concept. Um, yeah. So second year grad school, whole new world, whole new
Yeah.
way of relating socially.
Yeah.
Sounds incredibly life changing.
I don't know if I would have been able to like go forward and do what came next if the second year of grad school hadn't been that. Because like the first year was very similar to college where I studied and I did my work and I mean I had like two sometimes three jobs, like little part-time jobs, um, to like kind of make ends meet. But yeah, I mean, I was just like doing my work. And it's that
Mhm.
workaholic side where you really have to try, like at least I do, to like carve out space where you're going to socialize, where like this is not work time, like this is time for
Mhm.
friends. And is there time for friends? It's largely a question of did you make time for friends? And that was what changed was like if I'm going to have friends and spend time with them, I need to start making that a priority. Like if you don't prioritize it, it's not going to just happen. They're not going to come into your apartment while you're studying and like be like, "Hey, Carly, want to come to dinner with us?" Like that's not realistic. So yeah, my
Mm-hmm.
priorities had to kind of shift. And that was, I made like a close friend, Ashley, who started in the grad program the same time I did. She was from Arkansas. And by the beginning of summer, at the end of our first year, she and I were pretty close. And so we were spending a lot of time together and like pulling others into that a lot. So yeah, it was, again, I just healing in a way to see that, like, look at, you can make friends, you can do this.
Yeah. And so you say that that's kind of foundational to what came next. And obviously, what came next was not trading, commodities, corn and beans at
No,
some exchange in Iowa. Though I gotta tell you, Carly, that actually sounds kind of fun to me. Like being
you probably would have loved
like a
it.
commodities,
Yeah.
like a commodities market maker. That
It,
actually, it's
it,
an
yeah, that's what
incredible
you're doing.
role. Yeah.
Heavy into logistics. You're
Hmm.
constantly, trying to buy low, sell high, like
Right.
trying to
Yeah.
just move it around. And
Yeah.
it was one of those kinds of jobs where like I knew I would have been able to do it, but I
Sure.
could not see it being fun for me. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't see how it was
No,
going
I
to be
get you.
fun. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, I just was like, this can't be it. And then the grad school thing happened, and it was kind of an easy choice to take that route.
Oh yeah. I gotcha. So year two of grad school, what comes after that?
So hmm, it was basically the last few months of grad school, same as the end of undergrad. I had in my mind that like I'm looking across the entire US for job opportunities. I want to find the best job that I can. I don't really care where it is. And I'm going to go there and I'm going to like make it happen. Like for me, stepping out into the world was always about going somewhere where nobody knew me and building a reputation for myself that was based on what I contributed and not what had, my press, what's that called? Predecessors. Like
Predecessors.
I don't want my reputation based on them. I want it based on what I do. And to do that, you got to wipe the slate clean where nobody knows you. And so that's what I wanted to
Man,
do.
that's a brave notion. I mean, I honestly don't think that I've ever looked at it that way. Like I've always sought to get from one thing to the next thing by retaining connections. And it's not that
Oh,
I'm like afraid to start over or afraid to be judged on, you know, whatever the content of my character, so to speak. Like that doesn't bother me at all. But I just think that that's kind of unique. I don't think you look at that the same way that everybody does.
hmm.
I could be wrong, but I think that's unique.
I don't know why, but it just always felt really important to me that, I mean, I think maybe because I am so proud of my family. Like they are so incredibly impressive. And like kind of how in your episode you were describing about like there's a huge difference between a first generation business starter and like a
Mm-hmm.
second generation business inheritor, right? Like
Yeah.
the world's biggest
Mm-hmm.
difference. And so I knew on my legacy, like my predecessors, there's a lot to inherit,
Yeah.
a lot. And I could, just carry on the legacy that was started before me, or I could go start one myself. And I felt so much more resonance with being that person than the inheritor, which not to say that I
Okay.
have not greatly benefited from my family and everything that came before me. It's a powerful foundation
Sure.
I get to stand on
Yeah.
as I do what I'm doing. But yeah, it felt really important that I kind of break apart at least for a while and
Okay.
prove to myself, probably more than anybody else, that I can do it all by myself. I don't know why. That was just necessary that I know that.
Okay. Okay. That makes it that contextualizes a little bit for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what was it? What did you find? What did you do?
So, this is what another one of those times where one, I think as we make big life decisions, it really matters like what's most important to you. And at the time, money was not unimportant to me. It was decently motivating. Um,
Sure.
and so I had applied for lots of different jobs and went to interviews kind of all over the country, which was pretty cool, to have like, expenses paid to bring you to wherever they are and like have your interview and stuff. Um, and so I ended up applying at a software company that was located in Dallas, Texas. That was one of the places. And another of the places that I applied was at Cargill, I believe. Just there in the second, I couldn't remember if it's Cargill or Coke. It's one of them. And it was in Wichita, and that's where they wanted me to go. And both interviews went great. The software company, like a week later, sends me an offer like, hey, we want you to come here. Here's your starting salary. Here's what it would be. Here's your start date. Accept or reject by this date. And clear up until the accept reject, I didn't have any other offers that were better than that, either by money or location. And it was only after I accepted, and then maybe even like 2 or 3 weeks later, the Wichita position would have started me like $15,000 more. And I think
Oh,
if I had gotten that offer first or had them side by side, there's a decent chance that I might have taken the higher paying offer. And
so wait,
yeah,
just a second here. So you got an offer, you
yes,
accepted it, and
yes.
then 2 weeks later you got an offer that you otherwise might have accepted. Because I got to tell you, I think, I mean, how very 2009 of you. Because I think in 2023, the vast majority of folks would most likely just say, "Well, okay, now I'll take the better offer." But you chose not to do that.
Like you're saying they would cancel accepting the other offer?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, I think a lot of
Really?
people would do that.
I
Oh,
still can't
yes.
imagine doing that.
Well, I mean, put it to you this way, like if somebody asked me career advice about that, here's what I would tell them. Software company in Dallas gives you an offer. That's really nice. You accepted it. That's great. I promise you, if you work there 60 days and things aren't working out for them, like they'll let you go in a split hot second. They won't even bat
That's
an
a
eye. They won't
fact.
even think twice about it.
Yeah.
So if you think you might rather have this other job, just take it. You don't actually owe them anything. You didn't sign on for an indentured servitude. You accepted a job. That's all you did. So yeah, that's really
Wow.
interesting.
It is
And now
really
you're like
interesting.
the
And
things
now
that our
I'm
lives hinge
so,
upon.
well, exactly. I'm so freaking glad that I took the bigger leap and went to
Yeah.
Dallas. Like, it would have been so much easier to do what I did moving to Wichita. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would have been like 2.5 hours from where I grew up. And Dallas was an 8 hour drive from where I grew
Yeah.
up. Um, Not that I knew people in which I guess I did know some people that were living in Wichita at that time, but Dallas, like I knew no one. And so yeah, there's lots of reasons why I'm glad I was oblivious to the fact that I had the option to like cancel the first one and take the second one. Cause yeah, that well, and I remember too being like even at the time, like that $15,000, what is that really worth? Because the software company told me in the interview, the second interview, that like we promote on pretty much every year. Like every year to 2 years, like you're going to get promoted, you're going to get rotated to another team, you're going to have like a whole new job basically every couple years and kind of either get promoted within your team or move to a different team. So like very changeable setting is what they were doing. And the other one, the higher paying one, they said that within 3 to 5 years, you'll be eligible to be considered for a promotion.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that was the other thing that, like, I mean, yes, it was more money, but I remembered them saying that. And I was really excited at the thought of like every year you get to like, it's just like school. You get to like go to the
Yeah.
next thing and go to the next thing and go to the next thing. So that appealed to me too. And the starting pay was not bad by any means. Um, and it was Dallas. It's like the
Yeah.
South, like warm and no snow, very little snow.
Right. Very
So
little.
yeah, there was a lot to be excited for. And so it was gosh, it all happened like at the very end, moving out of Manhattan, because I was the state convention coordinator for Kansas FFA for the last few years that I lived in Manhattan.
Oh my
So like
goodness.
coordinating the 80 volunteers that put on the FFA as like kind of the liaison between the main lady and like all the volunteers. And
Mm.
so I did that, and convention happens like right at the end of May, and my job started June 6th. So it was like convention was done Friday at like 6 p.m. and Saturday morning I woke up and drove to Dallas, and Monday morning I started work.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a lot. And I moved
Yeah.
myself to Dallas in like a different trip with my mom and my brothers like the week before convention. So I had
Yeah.
like dumped all my stuff in my apartment and then came back for convention and then went back and started my job. Um yeah, it was mm, that drive to Dallas, man. I the first time it was fun. Like when we moved my stuff, I was like, this is awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Saturday morning, when like I'm done with convention, I'm like done with Manhattan. And now I'm going to move to a different state and like start a whole new book of my life. Like I
Mhm.
cried for like the first 3 hours, like bawled like a baby about like my first friends. Like, and now I'm like a year later after finally meeting friends, like now I'm going to leave them all behind and go off on some different
Yes.
thing. And like, this is so
It's
freaking
funny you
hard.
say that because that's part of what would be so hard for me.
Oh God, it was
Like,
hard. It was
God,
devastating.
yeah,
It's
I just,
heartbreaking. I
yeah,
mean, you try to
yeah.
stay in touch with people, and I did a little bit. But
Mhm.
that's hard to like have a whole life here and they have a whole life there and there's no proximity. I mean,
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So,
Man, try it before the era of social media, even harder.
well, and yeah, at that point, I think there was quite a bit of like we're all friends on Facebook, and that was basically
Sure.
the extent to which I kept
Yeah.
in touch, with those
I,
friends.
I
But
suppose that that's sort of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, yes, it's true, you're probably not going to completely lose touch with those folks and have no idea what's going on with their lives. But on the other hand, I think that that doesn't promote like a true connection in a lot of ways either. So
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. It was,
Fascinating.
well,
So you,
go ahead.
well, I was going to jump forward and just say, so you're in Dallas now and you're basically starting over again.
Yeah.
And you tell me what you were going to tell me, but then of course I think we'd all like to hear more about what that looked like.
Yeah. Well, and so at the software company that I started
Mhm.
with, they had a model for employees where everybody starts in this one team. And when you like the customer service team, where you're handling inbound calls, you're trying to help users of the software navigate the software to do what they need to do in the software. And the software itself,
Makes sense.
of like what it
Makes
is.
sense because then you learn it too. Yeah.
Exactly. That's why everybody has to start there. Is like first you need to learn like how does the system even work? What's it for? What are the people who are needing to log in there and do stuff? Like why do they need to do that? So that's where you start and you spend anywhere from like 6 months to about 18 months on that team before they rotate you into other areas of the company based on the potential that you're showing. They may put you on like a client development team where you're doing more sales and prospecting, or they may move you to a technical team where you're doing more work on the software. But everybody is pretty much starting in customer service with very few exceptions. And so
Okay.
that job, like the job itself was to answer the incoming calls. Your whole responsibility 9 hours a day, mandatory overtime that they did pay you for those 5 hours overtime. 9 hours a day, you answer the phone and you talk on the phone. And when you're not answering the phone, you're making outbound phone calls on behalf of the client development teams. So either you're making a call or you're receiving a call for 9 hours a day. And I am
Mm.
one of the most introverted people I've ever met that's like functioning. So the thought of talking on the phone for 9 hours a day, I say that because it basically killed any desire I had to like really keep in touch with my friends, to like really call them and, spend an hour catching up with
Mm.
them on the weekend. I'm like, kill me. I don't
Mm.
want to spend a single minute on the phone when I'm not at work because I already get 45 hours a week of being on the phone and it's slowly killing me. So to do any more than that was
Yeah.
just not realistic.
I'm not the same. I'm fairly extroverted, but to me, like that just sounds like a massive energy expenditure. Like at the end of that 9 hour I would just be shell. I wouldn't want to do anything.
That first year in Dallas, like, well, and I guess the first like 3 months, two months solid, you're in the classroom, and the third month you're between the classroom and starting to be answering the phone, that sort of thing. The first couple months, you're at school. You're at school to learn this software, and I freaking loved it. I was like top of my class, acing all the tests, whatever. Like that actually is a funny little story because they had like a 90-day review basically where exactly like what you said, if you're not performing, here's the door, and like you just
Mm.
moved yourself to Texas for no reason, and best of luck. Like they cut loose several people and they told us they were going to, so I mean there you go. But in my 90-day review I told them, like they were like, do you have any feedback on the training program that you just completed? And I was like, well, if anything, it's pretty slow paced. Maybe you could speed it up a little bit. Maybe it doesn't
Wow.
need to be 3 months. Maybe it could be like 6 weeks. Like I felt like it dragged out quite a bit as far as like the repetition and the how many days do we need to talk about the exact same thing before we can move on. And my trainer, he was like, well, next time you feel that way, gosh dang it. That was,
Well, it
I,
did
I
that last time too.
can do that. Turn that back on. Okay.
Okay.
I figured out why it was, and I definitely was doing it again just now. It's when I touched the little thing.
Uh,
Can't touch the thing. Stop
oh,
touching the thing. Okay.
no
Um,
thing touching. Yes.
yeah, no thing touching. No thing touching. Um, where was I? Do you remember?
So your trainer, you were talking
Yes.
about how you
Yes.
thought the training was slow.
Yeah. And he was like, well, next time you feel that way, how about instead of wishing the school bus would go ahead and go, how about you turn around and help other people put their seatbelts on? Because until everybody's seatbelt is on, we can't move forward. And
That's a great response.
that has stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I can't even believe that
Yeah.
like he had to tell me that because one of my favorite jobs throughout college was working as a tutor. I tutored
Mm.
statistics for 2 years, and that was so fun for me. And so, yeah, when he told me that, that planted a seed in my mind of, okay, now I'm like done with the training program and I'm hitting the floor. And like, I mean, we got ranked every week. You got like a list of the stats of like how many calls did you take, how many calls did you make, like, and now everybody is ranked and who's at the top and who's at the bottom, and like this is totally
Wow.
transparent, published every single week. And I was often in the top few at the beginning because that's just how I am, is like I'm working the whole time, but it was killing me.
Mhm.
And so very early on, it started happening where like I would be listening in between calls and I could hear somebody being like, "Oh, training manager, huh?" And like that's a really complicated tool that like hardly anybody uses, so you almost never have to go in there. And they're like, "Well, hang on just a second. Let me see if I can find somebody to help me. And I would like put myself on not ready and be like, I can help you. I know training manager. And so then I would go over to their desk and like talk them through their call and like support them as they're like helping with this person needing to use training manager or whatever. And so I
Wow.
started doing more and more of that. Word got around. Like that person comes back to me then next time they get a training manager call or OQ or TQ, or like these are all the tools that were like the really complicated ones that almost nobody used. And so they basically created a position for me that they had never had before, which was OQ, TQ training manager, subject matter expert. So that meant that if I wasn't on the
Ooh.
phone, somebody else could come and get me and help me. And my stats were no longer on the list. They no
Well,
longer
I was just going to ask,
what my stats
like,
were.
if that, I was just going to ask, did that mean that your performance somehow looked worse? But
No,
apparently, at least they were
because
good
I
enough to
was,
see through that. So
that's why they
good.
made me a SME so that they could take me out of the pure, like, judging me on my rank on the stats. Like,
A
here are my
SME, a
stats.
subject matter expert. Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
yes, yes. And so after that, like I was the first one of those that they had. And then there were pretty quickly, there were two or three other people who were really good at that same set of tools. And so now we're all that. And then as we get rotated out of customer service and move on with our journey within the company, they put other people in those positions. And now they have like 10 different kinds of
Oh,
SME
wow.
that you could be. And it's like a normal thing that you would specialize in a specific thing and you would help everybody else. So
Oh,
that
cool.
all came about because I knew that it was going to hurt my stats to like take time off the phone to go help somebody else, but like I couldn't take it like being on the phone 100% of the time I was there.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? Let me fall to the middle of the pack. I'm going to do something that makes me not want to not want to like go home and never come back. So I made it enjoyable for myself and almost immediately I had a really cool supervisor at that time. Almost immediately, like within a month, they created that role for me because my stats looked like crap, but he
Mhm.
saw like she's at everybody's desk helping them to get good stats. We can't punish her for this, so let's call it something and let her off the hook. And they did. So that was cool.
Well, that's at least somewhat enlightened, I guess. I mean, I certainly have been in, cultures and in institutions where the effort to help others would be surely penalized and not rewarded.
Yeah.
So that's a
Well,
good
and
thing.
they certainly didn't invite me to do this. they they
Right.
they were sharing the message, stats, 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 stats. They're
Yeah.
rewarding the highest ones. Those numbers, they sort them into tiers, and you either get a one, a two, or a three on your evaluation, and that's tied directly to your bonus.
Mm,
And all
yeah.
that is are you in the top third on average for your stats? Like that's all they were looking at. And I was like, you know what? Take my bonus. I'm going to have to quit soon if I don't find something that's helping me
Yeah.
to survive this because being on the phone the whole time is not working for me. So the
Sure.
last 4 months or so that I was there in that customer service role, I was there for like 10 months before I got sent to client development. But the last 4 months, I mean, bottom third of the stats every single time. I was almost never on the phone. I was almost always at somebody else's desk helping them with the
Hmm.
call they were taking, which was, yeah, I'm a teacher. That's perfect for me.
That's what happens when you're a SME, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like in the school part, in the training part at the very beginning, it was like, right. Like I was just soaking it up. Like I didn't need the repetition that was built into the training program. I got it the first time they showed it to us. And I remembered, like,
Sure,
oh,
sure.
that's how that works. And then they spent 3 more days making sure you got it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is
Yeah.
terrible. But yeah. So for whatever reason, learning software was a skill that like I didn't know I was good at that, but
Right.
I am. Like you give me a tour and
Well,
I
that's
can
a
remember what's in there.
I think that's a theme you have demonstrated on multiple occasions in multiple situations that like us, if it's a skill to learn things, that you have demonstrated that skill. like whatever somebody would want you to learn, even if it was how to be a market maker for corn and
I could
beans.
have learned
You
that.
could probably learn that skill.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could have, but I
So,
chose not
so
to.
you, right.
Yeah.
So you spent 10 months doing that thing that everybody did.
Hmm.
And then it was time to move on to another adventure there.
Yeah.
So,
And they ask you, like, what team, where do you want to go? You know, if you had like your top three picks of where do you want to go? And I listed my top three of where I wanted to go. And out of all the teams, probably my last choice was the one that they put me on. So,
oh,
which is like, again, just like the whole, did you move to Dallas or did you move to Wichita? I'm so glad I moved to Dallas. I didn't know at the time, like, what all of that was going to mean, but I would have picked these other teams and had that experience, but they gave me this one. And I'm so glad that they gave me that way. It opened up, like, the next several years opened up because of being on Team Canada. So I was on their Canadian operations team. I worked with
oh,
their
okay.
Canadian clients. I prospected for new businesses within Canadian companies. When I traveled to go meet with my clients, I went to Canada. That was the
Ooh,
first time I had ever left the country. Was the reason I had to get a
nice.
passport was because they put me on Team Canada. That was like step number one
Wow.
is, do you have a passport? No. Okay, well, you better get one because it takes a while and we'll be sending you sooner than later. So yeah,
Wow.
almost within the first couple months, I was going to Calgary, Alberta, is where most of the oil and gas clients are located in Canada. And that's where their second office opened, was in Calgary. So their main headquarters was in Dallas, and then they had an office in Calgary. So I worked out of the Calgary office. I was on Team Canada for 2 years and traveled varying degrees during that time. But at least, I mean, for the 2 years, I would say I went to Canada like at least once a month. And there were several months where I would come home for the weekend and go back the next week and come home for the weekend and go back the next week and come home for the weekend and go back. And like for the whole month, I would just be in
Wow.
Canada, except for getting to come home on the weekends. And the only reason they let me do that was because it was like one week I'd be in Montreal. And then the next week I'd be in Toronto. And then the next week I'd be in Vancouver. And so it, they let me come home because I was going to go back to a different place since I had to travel anyway. So,
Wow.
yeah,
That's a lot.
it was a lot. And much like being on the phone, it's a huge energy expenditure
Yeah.
to not be at
Yeah.
home. Like, I'm a homebody, and I didn't really know
Sure.
that until after those 2 years of Team Canada and being back and
Mm,
forth between Dallas and Canada. It was cool. Don't get me wrong. Like, I wouldn't trade that time for anything, but I don't think I would ever live like that again, where I'm on the road
yeah.
that much.
That would be hard for sure.
Yeah.
So if you were first generation college graduate, I wonder if you're also like first passport holder, one of the first passport holders and international travelers in your family.
Technically, no. My dad, he sells and services milking equipment. We talked about that on the
Right.
last episode.
Mhm.
And
I
he got
watched that video, by the way. That was insane.
the robot milker.
That's so cool. Yes.
Freaking awesome, right? Like,
Yeah, it
there you
is.
go. A robot
Mhm.
milking a cow. It doesn't look exactly what I had pictured in my head the first time I heard robot milking a cow. I was picturing much more of like a human looking robot, but it's a robot milking a cow. So uh,
Yep, it is.
yeah, so he got hired. He bid a job and got hired to do a job building a parlor in Santo Domingo, which is in the Dominican Republic. And so
Okay.
that job took, I'm going to say, like just over a year. And he came home like maybe once or twice in that time while he was doing that job. So he got his passport and
Ooh,
then he went there
yeah.
and then he came home several months later and then went back for several months. And then, yeah, that was the most gone he ever was
Okay.
doing that job. But that was basically what he did, was like bid these big jobs and then go on location and work 18 to 20 hours a day and 7 days a week and get the job done. that still took months at a time, usually, that he would be gone. And then he
Wow.
would come home
Okay.
for a little while and then go to the next one. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he did technically have a passport and he went there and he
Okay.
learned Spanish
Very
a little
good.
bit. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So worldly traveler. But yeah,
Yeah.
nobody else. And if he hadn't had that job, I mean, he wasn't traveling for leisure by any means. So
Sure. Right.
yeah. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So Team Canada, 2 years. You were there for longer than that, though. I mean, because that only gets us up to what, 2011, somewhere in that range,
Well,
2012.
I graduated from grad school in May of 2011. So I started at the software company June of
Oh, okay.
2011. So yeah, we're up to, 3 years later, 2014-ish.
Okay. So,
So,
what else is going on in your life at this time?
well, it was right around then. It was while I was still traveling for Team Canada that I met somebody that I got into a relationship with, and um, we ended up getting engaged and we're actually going to be married. And kind of that was all happening behind the scenes of us working together. He worked at the job. There were 500 people
Oh,
that worked at the job, but he was
okay.
one of them. That's how I met him, which makes a lot of sense when you look at my social life. It's like she only works and goes to
Yep.
her apartment. Where's she going to meet anybody anyway? Um,
I
so
can
yeah,
relate. Yep.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, but yeah, it didn't work out. And actually that's what flashed in my mind was I canceled my wedding before it happened. And when you said, why didn't you just cancel the job offer that you accepted and like take the better one? And I'm like, I can't imagine accepting an offer and then not like follow through on it. I said that like 30
Okay.
minutes ago.
You
And now
did say
here we
that
are
30 minutes
to
ago.
this part of the story. And this is why Carly is just one giant paradox because I was
Okay.
engaged for maybe 8 months. And then 6 weeks before the wedding, I basically told him that we can't get married in 6 weeks. I didn't break up with him. We owned a house
Okay.
together. I just said, like, this cannot become permanent in 6 weeks. We're not ready for that. And that was based on my assessment of the relationship. And within a few weeks after that conversation, the relationship had dissolved. He bought me out of the
Oh my
house. I was
goodness.
back on my way. So that happened behind the scenes of some of my best years at work, which I think were part of where I got the confidence to do that, where I was loving my job at that point.
Mhm.
These were my favorite years of like what came after Team Canada was 2 years in a role called CDQA, Client Development Quality Assurance. So you're still working on the client development team, you're working with the clients, and my role of CDQA was for our Team Canada, Team Australia, Team UK, and Team New Zealand. And so those were my clients that I handled the liaison role between those international clients and our software development team. So like if they
Did you get
needed
to go
updates,
to Australia?
oh yeah,
Or did you
yeah,
get, you did?
yeah, and New Zealand.
Fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
On the company's dime. Like,
Yes.
dude, traveling where somebody else is paying for it is way better than traveling on your own
Yeah.
money.
Way better.
Way better.
Yep.
Yeah, so I did get a lot of opportunities to do that. And that came out of my time on Team Canada, that like knowing the system and being so good at knowing the complicated parts of the system, they knew that about me. And that was why they transitioned me to Team Canada. I didn't know this at the time, but within 6 months, they had me leading the account that had like the most complicated data transfer with our company, like between our company and their company. They were receiving like thousands of data points out of our system into their system every day. And then every week they would get more data points. And every month there was different data points. And this file transfer was happening every day. And they wanted it rebuilt from the ground up. And so they come get me out of customer service and put me on Team Canada, give me 6 months to get my feet under me, and then put me in charge of this account. And that's what I did in like the year and a half that I was on Team Canada. Was I managed like all of these super complicated accounts where they are really integrated into our system. It's not just the typical, like, here's your invoice. Do you need anything? Can we pull any reports for you? Like, no, they have heavy demands on the company that I'm working for, and they need somebody who knows the system as well as possible. So after managing those like data transfer rebuilds and like other accounts that had stuff like that going on, that's when they put me in the CDQA role. And I was also one of the very first ones of those that they had ever had, as far as like people who were working with the client teams, but they are software people. And so that was like the best time I had at ISN, was like still getting to be in business meetings with business people where we're talking about business outcomes and like the business purposes behind why do they need a report that says this, and this. They need it because their gate person needs to be able to check that this number is right before they open the gate and let somebody come on site. So like I wanted to be in that conversation, but then when I went home and was with the software developer guys, they're like, okay, well, we need to know what to name this column. We need to know, do you want any spaces under that? Do you like what, they need it designed. They need somebody to tell them like what code to write. And so
Oh,
I got
sure.
to absorb the business needs and then write requirements that got given to the software developers of like, here is specifically how you guys are going to write what this client needs. And I'm going to see if I can find it. There was a meme that the guy who was in charge of the software developers always used to share about basically the problem with losing things in translation. It's like the client asks for this, and this is what the person hears, and so this is what the person says, and then this is what gets built, and it's like nothing like what the client originally wanted. I'll see if I can find it. I'll put it on the screen if I did.
So that's
Yeah.
very interesting because just hearing you talk about this, it's obvious how like it was important to you and you excelled at it and it was a good time. Like just even hearing you talk about it now, and that seems like such a useful skill.
Yeah.
Um,
Translator, basically.
tr- Translator from business to the tech folks. Yeah, that's
Yes.
really, really important. I wish I had one of those,
Yeah.
that followed me around and could translate stuff a little bit. But
It's
so this is
rare,
going
I
on
found.
at, at the same time you're in this relationship that appears to be headed towards marriage, and then it's not. So it seems to me, when I look at my own life and the lives of those around me, these periods of change often line up with each other. And so I guess in my head, I'm sitting here wondering, is that the case? Like, like, was there a change in the business thing that led to this change in the relationship status? Or did a change in the relationship status then lead to a change in what you were doing at work?
Mm,
Or are these things not related? Because obviously you're not there doing that anymore.
right. Yeah, how that position ended is a moment that I think we've heard a couple times in the My Grocery Adventure series, but the I think the way that they relate is that I was loving my work, and as we've heard, work is a very big part of my life, and so that meant I was loving almost all of my life. And if I had been miserable at work, I probably wouldn't have noticed how not exciting and not fulfilling the relationship was. Like if it had been across the board all the same. But because
Uh,
my work satisfaction was like through the freaking roof, and then I come home and I'm like having this relationship and I'm like, dude, like, is this it? Because like when we're engaged, I would think that it's not going to be any better than this after we get married. Like it's probably only going to go downhill into like a comfortable place. And I feel like we're already at the bottom of the hill, and I really don't want to see where we go down from here. Like, I have
Okay.
no interest
Yeah.
in seeing where that goes as we sink even lower. And again, because I have the contrast of like loving something so effortlessly and then fighting for it over here. And I'm like, do you really want something that you have to fight this hard to hang on to? Or do you want something that, like, the CDQA role, I had never found anything that, much like grad school, like that took what was already going on inside of me and made use for it in the world. Like the
Mm-hmm.
combination of somebody who could talk business and talk business with a client and talk code with the developers. Like there was only like four of us at the whole company who could do this. And
Yeah.
again, after we were done and they moved us on, like they put other people in that role. It became a thing that like these are the people who can translate between the two groups, and you need that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing that like I have value to bring to the
Mm-hmm.
table big time. And that look at like this is working and people appreciating what I'm doing. And then at home, no, like there's not that. And so the contrast was so undeniable. And
Mm-hmm.
still, though, I mean, I was thinking these things and I was having these, like, I wish this was better kind of thoughts. Like, I wish this was different. And it basically came down to I stuffed the wedding invitations like in June, and we were supposed to get married in September. And those wedding invitations, they sat on my coffee table for like 2 months, like just sat there. And every day I looked at them
Oh
and I was like,
no.
I just don't feel like going to the post office today. Like that
Oh
was
my
all I was
goodness.
thinking, was like, I don't feel like dropping those off today. And by the time I canceled the wedding, I mean, it's only 6 weeks before, and I never did mail the invitations. And one day I'm coming down after work. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I under the building in the parking garage. I like shut my door and I just start crying. I just start bawling like uncontrollably. And I was so confused because I'm like, what is this? Like, what's going on? I have no reason to be crying. I don't, not that I know of anyway. And then this is a little bit supernatural moment, but like, and then this voice says to me, you need to cancel the wedding. And I realized when I heard the voice say that, that like the reason I'm crying is because I know I'm going to cancel the wedding and I'm freaking terrified. This will be the
Yeah.
scariest thing that I have ever done. As far as like, how do you even do that? Like, what do you even do? I Googled it. How do you cancel a wedding? And there are
Well, the good
steps.
news is you the good news is you hadn't mailed invitations, so that at least cuts out some of those steps
Well,
probably.
we sent save the dates, and that was
Uh,
part of why I had like given myself such a leisure with like mailing the invitations, because I'm like, they have the save the date, like they know the date. If they're coming, they're coming, and if not, no big deal. The invitation's not going to change that. So I
so
just like
send
totally,
out a JK law, right?
I didn't send anything. I just never sent the invitations, and the people who knew told the other ones, and
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. That was that was a moment that I think I will include here, as far as like, how do you know you made the right decision in
Uh,
moments like that? And so I Googled how do you cancel a wedding, and I get the steps, and like number one, tell the other person. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good first step. So
that's a
I'm
good,
working
good
on my
first step.
steps
I'll go
here.
with that.
Yeah. And then the other ones are like, you got to tell the vendors, and not everybody's going to give you a refund on your deposit, and yada, yada, yada. And yeah, like it ended up costing me some money. And
By that time, I'm sure you're like money well spent.
it was a great lesson to learn.
Cheaper than divorce 10 years later,
Absolutely.
5 years later. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if we would have even made it that long. So yeah,
Yeah.
why go through with it? So when I told him, like this was probably the next day. I didn't tell him immediately. I got an emergency therapist session, talked to her for a while, and I sit him down after work the next day and tell him, like I said, like we can't get married in 6 weeks. Like That's all I'm saying is like, we're not getting married in 6 weeks. And he said, are you saying you're canceling the wedding? Yes. And he got up and he went outside for like 2 hours and he came back inside. It's dark 2 hours later. And he sits down and he's like, so genuine and earnest. What are we going to tell people?
Oh,
That's what he wants to know about.
oh,
And
okay.
in that moment, I told him, I'm like, I don't care what you tell your people. I'm going to tell my people we're not getting married. But in that moment, I knew for a fact I've done the right thing. If
Yeah,
this person is only worried about what is this going to do to his reputation? He's not asking me why I'm doing this. He's not asking me to stay and change my mind. He's not thinking about me at all.
yeah,
And I was like, I feel like I just dodged the world's biggest bullet. So yeah,
yeah,
that it was a reassuring moment. It hurt my feelings a little bit that that's how
yeah.
he felt, that he didn't care
Mhm.
more to like fight more. But at the same time, I was like, this has been the problem the whole
Right.
time. So
Yeah.
again, probably best that we just call it a day.
Well, those kind of acute crisis moments are awfully instructive. I mean, they teach us about ourselves and they teach us about those around us. And it sounds like you learned some things that were pretty valuable to learn in that moment. So,
Yeah. I feel like it was like a true colors kind of
mm,
moment where I I felt like I was seeing the real him maybe for the first time, where again I had been wishing a lot for like things to be different. And
sure.
yeah, it's like you can do that, sure. You can wish for somebody else to be different, but we have no control over anybody but ourselves. And at the end of the day, this voice, whoever told me you need to cancel the wedding, like my higher self, my subconscious mind, I don't know. I don't know. But I was already processing the emotions before I even heard the words because it was just so done. It was so decided
Yeah.
that that was what was going to happen. And yeah, scary.
I think I might have let time get away from us just a little bit. I think
Just
it's
a little
been
bit.
well over an hour. Not
I
too
don't
bad, but
I don't hate that this wedding story is like tacked on the end of an episode where like you really got to dig. If you want to see this part, you're going to need to
I'm with you. Yeah,
yeah.
I can
Yeah.
imagine.
There's
I
a
can see how
loyalty
you feel that.
quotient that'll have to be met
That's right.
before you're going to hear this story. So, yeah.
Yes, if you are the person that only listens to the first hour of the podcast and you
Yeah.
schedule it right in there, then you might
Yeah.
have missed this story.
Yeah. Nothing wrong
So
with
yeah,
that. Okay.
no.
But somebody maybe needed to hear something in there. And it
Yes.
was it was one of those things where talk about changing the trajectory of my life. You
Oh my
know,
God.
I
Yeah.
owned a house in Sunnyvale and I was 6 weeks away from being married. And a month later, I don't
Sunnyvale, California.
Sunnyvale, Texas. It's a
Oh,
it's a
okay.
suburb of
Sunnyvale,
Dallas.
California is like right in Silicon Valley. I'm like,
Oh, fancy. No, this was not like that at all. It was like
oh, okay.
small town, but maybe a 30-minute drive if there wasn't bad traffic to get to
I
my
got you.
office in Dallas. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That because I was like, well, I mean, I know we're talking software, but I didn't know that your Dallas company got bought out by Silicon Valley private
No,
equity. Because
they probably wish, but
yeah,
yeah,
very
no.
good. So I guess we'll leave it here,
Yeah.
and when we talk next, I, I obviously things happened after that, and you moved from Dallas back to Kansas, and that's high on the list of things that inquiring minds want to know about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, and we'll start with just a little bit more of the software company story.
okay.
Yeah,
I
because
noticed that you haven't told us the name of it, and I
and I'm gonna
assume there's
edit
a
that out.
reason for that.
Yeah. Which, dude, again, like if you really wanted to know, you can go look. There's
Probably
there's
yes.
places you can figure out such things, but
Yes.
it's not important. It's
Yeah.
relevant.
I don't blame you a bit. I would probably look at it
Yeah,
the same way.
yeah. I
So
got what I
very
got out
good.
of there, and it was a lot. It was a whole career, it felt like, in only 5.5 years of working there
That's
because it was like five different jobs during
yeah.
that time. And so far I guess four different. No, it was five. It was five different jobs. So we've talked about three of them so far.
Right.
So I still have two more jobs at the
Okay.
software company to talk about, which was a whole scandalous thing all by itself. So that's what we'll start with when we come back. Is like, why
Ooh, you
would
say
you?
scandalous, and my eyes get
Well,
big.
the
Yes. Tell
question
me
is,
scandal.
why would you leave something that you loved that much? Like you loved CDQA. Why were there two more jobs? You loved this. It was the best thing that you'd ever found. Like, why on earth would you give that up? And so
That's
that's where we'll
exactly
start
what
next
I
time.
was thinking. Because
Yeah.
I mean, even now to this day, listening
Yeah.
to you talk about it, it's
Yeah.
obvious how much you love doing that.
Yeah.
So,
The short
okay.
version is if they had let me stay a
Yeah.
CDQA, I probably would still be there doing that because it
Gotcha.
was it was a high that like I've never found in work since.
Yeah.
The combination of things was like so fun and it's hard to recreate, but yeah, they didn't let me stay. So
Yeah.
I didn't get to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where we'll pick
Well,
up next time.
their loss is Kansas's gain. We'll take it.
That's kind of what I'm thinking, like again, like it wasn't meant to be. They
Yeah.
they pushed me out and pushed me forward and I needed it
Yeah.
in that moment because I wouldn't have left that job. It was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think there would also be fairly high burnout quotient. Like you wouldn't want to leave it, but you couldn't do it for 10 years.
Yeah. That would be hard.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the way I was working back then. Like, I mean, it was easily 60 hours a week every week.
Oof.
And
Yeah.
I
That's hard
loved
to
it.
think.
Like, I go home at the end of 9 hours and I get back on my laptop and I'm like talking to my Australia team that like just showed up to work a few hours ago. Like I was
Mhm.
24/7 between all my time zones. And there was part
Yeah.
of me that just like ate it up, loved it. But yeah, it wasn't
I
meant to
can
be.
relate when one feels needed. I've had a couple of situations like that in work. Once I was a plant master scheduler, and frankly, at the SBDC, where yeah, it's like 24 hours a day. I mean, and it's like it matters because it matters to other folks, and it matters
Yes.
because like they really need the thing that you have, and
Yes.
it's hard to I can say no to almost anything. Actually, that's kind of not true. I'm the worst person in the world at saying no. But if I really feel like somebody needs that thing that I got and I can give it to them, it's so hard to say no to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I was right there. I'm glad
Yeah.
you pinpointed that because as a person, like maybe we all love to be needed, but I love it a lot, maybe more than average.
Yes, I
So,
can relate. Yeah.
yeah, so being of service is one of my greatest all-time passions. And when nobody is benefiting from my service, then it's like, well, maybe I keep doing it, maybe I don't. But yeah, like in that role, dude, like the UK team shows up at 1 a.m. my time. The Australia team shows up at 4 p.m. my time. So, like, literally 24/7, my inbox is just receiving these requests of like, hey, do you know what this is? Have you heard anything about this? Like, my client wants this. Like, just constantly the go to of like, I'm the hub into the rest of the company for these people. And
Yeah.
it was yeah, it was intoxicating, but probably like you
Yeah.
said, like if I had stayed, I would have gotten to the point where it probably ate me up and spit me out kind of thing. So
Eventually.
maybe for the best that I get to remember it in its shiny fun stage and
Yeah.
ruin it by staying too long.
All right. Well, we will get back to this. If you have
Yes.
any kind of outro for your people, now would be the
Thanks
time.
for watching. Thanks for listening, especially if you're still here. Like the
Yeah.
video, subscribe to the
That's
channel.
right.
We'll be back on future episodes for the rest of my story. There's already what's turning into a whole archive of other people's stories already on the channel. We're almost to episode 20 when we get here. I'm pretty sure this is like episode 19. I don't know that for sure off the top of my head, but I think so. Like,
Wow.
dude, we're cruising, and I appreciate everybody who has supported this endeavor so far. I know I have been having an absolute blast aside from
Well, and we
maybe
appreciate you.
the little pocket of anxiety before the last episode. But other than that, it's been totally awesome. So yeah,
That's right.
we'll see you guys next time. Until then, I hope
Okay.
everybody takes good care. Okay, bye.
Bye.